is EWA Radio, the official podcast of the Education Writers Association, and I'm public editor Emily Richmond. It's summer, school's out, and that means education reporters finally have time to catch their breath. Right? Not so fast. The beat doesn't stop just because it's hot. That's why we're going to share some summer story ideas, and I have two reporters in mind to help us out. First up, I'm going to get Delece Smith-Barrow, a senior editor for higher education for the Hechinger report, on the line. I'm going to dial her up now. Boopity boop.
Hello.
Delece?
Emily?
Yeah, how are ya?
I am good. How are you?
Good. You got a couple minutes to talk about summer story ideas for the EWA Radio podcast?
Usually I wouldn't, but for EWA Radio Podcast, I'll make some time.
Oh, you're the best. Listen, I want you to do the higher ed stories, but I'm going to get Lauren Camera of U.S. News and World Report on the line to talk about K-12. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, let's dial her up.
Hello, this is Lauren.
Lauren, it's Emily at EWA Radio.
Hey, Emily, how's it going?
Good. I've got Delece Smith-Barrow with us from the Hechinger report, and we're going to talk about summer story ideas. You want to join?
Yeah, I would love to.
Oh, great. Okay. Let's get going. I'm going to start with Delece. Delece, you've been doing some great reporting lately related to some rollbacks by Education Secretary Betsy DeVos related to how colleges are held accountable for preparing their graduates for the workforce. Why is this a great summer idea for reporters?
This is a big summer story, really, because June is a big month for these rollbacks. So right now, the last public meeting listed on record for rolling back the gainful employment rule is June 11th. And it's strongly believed by higher education policy experts that after this day, we can expect no more gainful employment rule. And this is a big deal because this rule was created to really make sure that for-profit colleges were adequately preparing students to get jobs that would pay enough for them to pay back their student loan debt. So once this rule goes away, for-profit schools will have more leeway. They'll be able to expand their enrollment, which has recently taken quite a hit. It was down about 20% within the last year. Before, if they weren't following the rule, they were at risk of losing government funds. And the rule wasn't actually enforced properly. But if it goes away entirely, then it really just gives them a lot more freedom and a lot less federal oversight.
But the rule doesn't just apply to private colleges, right? I mean, the public schools are also being held on the same hook.
They are, but it's really for non-degree granting programs, which you do find particularly at two-year public colleges, so maybe community colleges. But the rule most hurts for-profit colleges because many of their programs do not offer degrees. So they are much more sensitive to this rule. They're much more at risk of losing federal funding through the gainful employment rule than, community colleges, for example, which do award many, many associate degrees.
So if I'm a local education reporter, where do I start? Do I look at where the for-profit colleges are in my area and ask them how they may predict enrollment to change if this rule is dropped?
I would start there. I would certainly ask which programs within their specific institution are they looking to increase enrollment? Certain sectors, such as healthcare, they've already started to see enrollment bounce back. But I would start with local for-profit colleges and ask them specifically, without this rule, how do you plan to restructure your enrollment strategy? Have you already seen more interest in students? And I would just really get on the ground with that.
What's Betsy DeVos saying about this? She's expecting just the local market to sort of bear out and the less qualified schools will just eventually close?
What the secretary is saying that this rule was unfair from the beginning because it specifically focuses on for-profit institutions and that we should compare for-profit and nonprofit institutions with the same metrics. The secretary is also banking on the fact that as the department continues to improve the college scorecard, and students who want to go to college or students who are currently in college, they can more accurately compare the different institutions that they're considering. They can go to the college scorecard and just look at various schools that maybe offer the same or similar programs and get a stronger idea of what these schools can do for them and make a decision that way. So she thinks that as the scorecard is improved, students will be empowered with more choice. And so some schools, maybe they will naturally never have their enrollment go back up because students will choose not to go. But she doesn't want the government to be so forceful in telling people where they can or can't go, or even controlling the purse strings of these institutions.
So let's stick with Betsy DeVos for a moment. Lauren, school choice wasn't just her big platform when she was selected as education secretary. It was central to her experience as a private citizen advocate. This is a complicated summer, though, for the charter school debate. Tell us what's up and what local reporters should be watching for.
Yeah, absolutely. So the broad school choice tent is going through a major rebranding right now due to a number of things we don't really have time to dig into. But one of the big takeaways here is that charter schools are getting pinched by the association with DeVos's school choice agenda on one side and the teachers union's aggressive push for this more traditional public school education model on the other side. You're seeing lots of left-leaning as well as right-leaning think tanks producing battling research about charter schools. I think, for the first time in a really, really long time, Congress is considering cutting funding for the federal charter school program. It's even reaching the level of the presidential election. We have Bernie Sanders' K-12 plan includes a ban on all for-profit charters and a suspension of federal dollars for charters. And charter school groups are really sounding the alarm. I mean, they're arguing they're being unfairly targeted. Nuance gets lost, right? When education issues become politicized. We saw this with the Common Core, for example. So this is what's happening with charter schools right now. This is all to say, check in with any charter schools that might be in your district area, your coverage areas. Ask them if they're feeling the pinch or feeling targeted. Is this fair criticism? Just like traditional public schools, there are some lousy charters and some really great charters. So what's happening in your coverage area?
I would say to education reporters, this is a great time, anytime you're writing about charter schools, to include the definition, to explain these are publicly funded schools that are supposed to operate independently. And it's also worth saying just what Lauren just said, that there are standout examples, just like there are standout examples for traditional public schools.
Yeah, I'm sure some of your listeners have seen some of the passionate Twitter exchanges the last month or two with people even going to the mat to argue that charter schools aren't public schools, which, as Emily just noted, they are. So
I think that's an excellent point. Let's stick with federal policy here for another moment. Delece, let's start with you and the Higher Education Act. It's been 11 years since the last version was reauthorized. There have been multiple attempts to bring it back to the table. Is now the magic moment?
It's really hard to say, but now is definitely a moment. So Senator Lamar Alexander, who is head of the Senate Committee on Education, he will not be seeking reelection. And this is something that he really wants to make happen because it did not happen in 2018. He's nearing the end of his term. So he has been very outspoken in wanting to reauthorize HEA. His Democratic counterpart, Senator Patty Murray, she's also been very outspoken about what she wants to happen with HEA and that she hopes that it will move quickly. But it's hard to say that if passion alone will actually lead to legislation. The Democrats and the Republicans are just not on the same page with much of what they want to happen. So there's agreement that the dollar amount for Pell Grant recipients should increase, that the student loan financing and payback system should be condensed. It just should be easier to fill out FAFSA, and there shouldn't be so many different ways that you can pay back a student loan. Once you get beyond those two issues, it gets a little trickier in terms of getting everyone on the same page. I know Senator Murray has even talked about tying HEA legislation to kind of sexual assault on campus and making sure schools are accountable in that way. It's not clear where there's a lot of conversation across the aisle that shows that this will be a true bipartisan effort, which it needs to be. So the clock is kind of ticking on Senator Alexander's time in the Senate. So that might push things a little bit. But because we haven't really seen a bill yet, it's really hard to say what will happen.
So what's a good place for a local reporter to start on this summer?
I would actually start with the House of Representatives. So they've actually been very aggressive about holding hearings on things that they want to make sure are most prominent in this new bill. So they've held, I think, at least two in the last few months, and there might be another two or three coming up. They are really looking at college affordability. I don't think it's as black and white as, the loan repayment system or whether or not you change FAFSA, but how HEA can really help students of color, students who are the first in their family to go to college. So I would kind of watch their calendar. Of course, we have the summer recess coming up, but behind the scenes, there's just been a lot of discussion. I would also speak with your local legislatures to see what they are doing to maybe lobby for specific efforts. Rep. Donna Shalala, she's from Florida. She's also been pretty outspoken about making sure the bill will lead to equality, particularly after the Varsity Blues scandal. She was quick to introduce legislation that might address that type of inequality. So I would certainly watch the congressional calendar and then start speaking with your local reps, even your state governor's office to see what they are doing to kind of push this change.
And Lauren, I'd love for you to talk about some federal policy specifically related to how the census is taken. There's some big changes being proposed by the Trump administration and bipartisan concern about how that could play out. Walk us through it.
So the Supreme Court is set to decide this month whether the forthcoming 2020 decennial census will ask respondents whether they are U.S. citizens. And the Trump administration wants this so-called citizenship question included in the survey. But the anticipated undercount of people in poverty, which is going to be driven by the overall reluctance of immigrant communities and Hispanic households to complete the census if the citizenship question is included, that undercount is expected to have a really big impact on federal K-12 funding for school districts that serve a lot of vulnerable students. So really what's at issue here is how the population and poverty data collected by the census are used to distribute federal dollars for a whole host of programs that go beyond education. But education will be one of the big buckets that will be most severely impacted. Of the top 11 federal programs ranked by dollars distributed using the census data, 5 specifically involve students in education. Those include things that you report on all the time, the National School Lunch Program, the Title I program for poor students, special education grants for students with disabilities, Head Start, early Head Start, things like that. So obviously, in this case, location matters a lot. About 7% of people living in the U.S. are non-citizens, but in states like California, New York, Texas, that percent could be doubled. So if you're in an area or a community where there's a lot of immigrant families, a lot of Hispanic households, you definitely want to be reaching out to your school system to see how they're preparing or thinking about the potential undercount. And what I've found in my reporting is that they are already prepping to do some serious outreach to these communities to try to explain to them that the census officials have said this information will not be shared if you complete the census. And they're trying really to make a big case for having these communities who are nervous about a citizenship question to complete it anyway.
Well, I think a great question for reporters to ask, if you don't already know the answer, is what percent of your district's budget comes from federal money? Typically, it's somewhere between 5 and 10%, but that can still be a pretty big slice.
Yeah, especially for communities that aren't really bolstered by their property taxes. So if you're in a school district with low property taxes, the federal funding that you receive is going to mean more to that community.
We're talking with Delece Smith-Barrow of the Hechinger Report and Lauren Camera of U.S. News and World Report about summer story ideas. Don't miss an episode of EWA Radio. You never have to. You can find us on your favorite podcast app. If there's a story you want to know more about, drop us a line with radio@ewa.org. Lauren, summer's a great time to catch up with the presidential hopefuls and their education plans. What are some of the common themes you're seeing so far that local reporters should be watching for?
So we're currently seeing a bit of a race among Democratic presidential hopefuls to sort of prove who is the biggest defender of public education. And I think that this has been really interesting to watch unfold. We're seeing a lot of proposals for an increase in funding for Title I, big pay raises for teachers, policies to address school segregation. Elizabeth Warren came out saying she would name a public school teacher as the Secretary of Education. Most of this is being driven by the two national teachers unions who are currently in the middle of their presidential endorsement vetting process. So that's why we're seeing a lot of this. But it's also in reaction to educator unrest that's prompted a lot of strikes and protests and walkouts the past year or two. Many campaign watchers say that the issue of education is going to peak during the primary. So be on the lookout for sure for more of this summer. I'm especially interested, for example, in what Cory Booker's education policy pitch is going to be to the unions. As most of you probably know, he's been a really big backer of school choice, specifically private school choice and scholarships, and, even sat on the board of the American Federation for Children with the current Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. So there's going to be a lot of interesting things to cover this summer during the primary season.
Well, certainly, some candidates have been sounding the alarm on certain aspects of education long before they were presidential candidates. I'm thinking of Julian Castro has been a universal preschool advocate since his days as mayor of San Antonio. Definitely not a latecomer to that bandwagon. Does that buy him some street cred here?
I definitely think so. There are so many teachers in this country, and they all pay attention to issues that are going to impact their careers and their ability to do what they love to do for children. So there are definitely a lot of watchers. I should also mention sometimes the summer provides a bit of a lull for us at K-12 reporters. So I'm personally looking forward to digging into some of the early campaign finance reports to see how the unions are spending in the early primary season. Are they giving substantially, and to whom? That might make for some good summer stories.
Delece, I'm going to ask you to jump in here. The candidates have been talking about student loan debt. What's your take on their plans, and who seems to have the most specifics?
I think Elizabeth Warren has had the most detailed approach in terms of reducing student loan debt, which I'm sure many of your listeners know at this point. It's over 1.5 trillion, so it's pretty astronomical. But we still largely haven't heard a lot of details about how we can reduce student loan debt without increasing debt in other areas of the economy. So the Department of Education, I think, is poised to lose money because of the number of people who already cannot pay back their debt. If their debt is just eliminated or a strong percentage of it just goes away, that could have other ramifications. And also, when it comes to reducing student loan debt, we just have to keep in mind that states are spending significantly less on higher education, which is one reason that tuition and fees are going up. It's a problem at the federal level and the state level. And so I think if candidates are really focusing on that in their platform, they have to almost think of it in two parts. The first being, of course, nationally, Department of Education, but then locally, what are the real problems at the state government level that's preventing them from investing more in higher education. So I hope that as we get closer to 2020, we'll hear some more detailed plans where people can be very explicit about a strategy for students who graduated school maybe 10 years ago, not solely focusing on students who are in school now or soon to enter.
Well, I'm all for transparency and accountability, including in EWA radio. So I'm going to have to admit to our listeners, I may have told Delece and Lauren I might be calling to ask them for some story ideas. And Delece, you actually had one prepared that I'd love for you to share, and it's related to college admission exams.
Definitely. So I have just been consuming every bit of information about the recent scandal where several parents allegedly bought their children's way into very prestigious universities, such as the University of Southern California. One part of the Varsity Blues scandal in particular was the role of test taking, students who were enabled to submit test scores for the SAT that maybe they didn't take the test themselves or they had some help with getting that higher score, like in the actual exam room. So the next ACT is July 13th. The next SAT is August 24th. If I were a local reporter, I would be on the ground at those testing centers on that day. Obviously, you can't be in the room, but you can be there right before students take the test. You can be there right after. And I would ask, is there any additional monitoring? Does the environment seem stricter than it was perhaps, if you're a second-time test taker, you will have something to compare it to? And also speak with parents and families of, particularly juniors and seniors to hear if they are worried in any way about how this test or these college admissions exams are being monitored, or if people are kind of in any type of pay-to-play scheme. The SAT, which is, run by the College Board, they're introducing an adversity index, a score that will be added to your score that takes into account your any type of socioeconomic hardship. The ACT has said that this adversity index score is just not that great, that the SAT and College Board, their hearts are in the right place, but they just don't think it's a good idea. But I would be very much on the watch to see if ACT this summer introduces something that is similar, a way to better characterize test scores that takes into account socioeconomic hardships that students face. So I think that will be a big story this summer.
We've covered a lot of ground, but I want to offer 3 quick hit story ideas of my own. The first is on the K-12 front, summer stories on teachers who moonlight. That's always a winner. Take a look around your local district to see which teachers and educators are taking on second or even third jobs. Summer is a great time to get those FOIA requests in, and it's also a good chance to talk to your local colleges and universities about how they're using college entrance exams to assign college freshmen to remedial classes. We've had a slew of story ideas from our guests. I want to thank them for making time for EWA Radio, Delece Smith-Barrow of the Hechinger Report, and Lauren Cameron of U.S. News and World Report.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Emily. Have a good one.
And that wraps up another episode for us. If there's a story you want to know more about, remember you can drop us a line at radio@ewa.org. The mission of the Education Writers Association is to strengthen the community of education journalists and improve the quality of education coverage. For more than 70 years, EWA has helped reporters get the story right. Have a great week, and thank you for listening.